Declassified U.S. government documents and witness testimony from former or retired U.S. military personnel confirm beyond any doubt the reality of ongoing UFO incursions at nuclear weapons sites.
How does anybody get into the topic of UFOs showing up around nuclear sites?
My father was career Air Force, and in 1967 he was stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana. I was a junior in high school at the time. He got me a job at the air traffic control tower on the base as a janitor. At one point I made the acquaintance of an FAA supervisor named Bob Grasser. One night, and as best as I can tell, it was the second half of March of '67, was emptying trash cans and pushing a broom. And he motioned me over to his scope. And he pointed, he said, "We're tracking," and he probably said unknowns. That's the formal term for unidentified objects. I saw 5 blips in the sort of northeast quadrant of his radar scope. As I recall it, after all these years, I got kind of excited by this and started peppering him with questions. And his whole demeanor kind of went, uh-oh, I've said too much. Nevertheless, I went home and told my dad, you're not going to believe what happened tonight at the tower. He said, the guys that I'm talking to down there think they're probably Soviet surveillance planes. And even though I was 16, I went, 5 surveillance planes, and the controller told me they were basically stationary. Are the Soviets flying helicopters over Montana? I don't think so.
When his stint as a janitor at Malmstrom was over, Robert went to college, got married, and began working as a photographer. But that gnawing urge to understand what he had witnessed never left him. In 1973, while brushing up on UFOs, he stumbled upon an article that famed astronomer J. Allen Hynek had written in 1966 while running Project Blue Book, the official government UFO investigations program out of the Air Force. The article said that UFOs had flown around nuclear missiles at Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota.
And I went, holy crap, that's had to be what was happening at Malmstrom. So I was off and running at that point, and slowly but surely during the early 70s onward, I just began seeking out military veterans who might have information they could share.
When we got down there, they told us that this bogey was out there right over the Hanford Ordnance Works and directed Lieutenant Commander Brown to take off and challenge him.
Thanks to Robert's efforts, we now know that UFO overflights of nuclear bases were happening as early as 1945 in the United States.
Months before the Trinity test in New Mexico, months before the atomic bombings in Japan, Bud Clem was describing luminous balls of light hovering over the Hanford plutonium production site, being chased away unsuccessfully by jet fighters on 3 occasions.
He said, all I can see is a bright red or reddish-orange fireball right up in front of me.
When the Roswell object crashed, which Lou Elizondo in his new book has said was indeed a bona fide UFO crash in July of '47, that base was the only nuclear bomber base in the world at the time.
In 1948, a renowned expert in meteorites at the University of New Mexico named Lincoln La Paz began studying green fireballs, often in correlation with nuclear facilities and detonations. He concluded that given the fireball's flight patterns, that they were artificially controlled and not just naturally occurring phenomena.
Dan Wilson spent I don't know how many hours tracking down green fireball sightings that were coinciding with radiation drifting across the American landscape. Dozens and dozens of instances where within hours of a certain test occurring and the subsequent radiation drifting across this part of America or that part of America, those geographic locations had green fireball sightings.
Fascinating.
When they exploded, unlike a normal meteor, there was no noise, there was no debris found.
It didn't continue after 1948, so the question is still open.
And what about the famous DC flyover in 1952?
In Washington, ghost-like objects dart across the radar screen at the CAA Traffic Control Center at National Airport for several hours, traveling more than 100 miles an hour.
This was a very famous incident where saucers were seen everywhere in and around Washington, D.C., causing headlines like "Saucers on the White House Lawn," and an emergency phone call between President Truman and Blue Book Chief Investigator Edward J. Ruppelt. But what did any of this have to do with nuclear?
What happened in 1952?
The D.C. UFO sightings in July.
Yeah, I was going to say the
Well, what else?
the first H-bomb.
The H-bomb. Tell her, yeah.
The concern that I have is that in 1952, what if there was someone there to hear what we said in the Pacific? We sent off a signal, just the way when North Korea detonates a nuclear device, it sends seismic waves through the earth. It can't stop sending information outside of the country. I think in 1952, we sent a signal to the cosmos, which is that we're very, very close to being in possession of root-level knowledge, to take a software metaphor. If there was something or someone there to hear us, they probably heard us as saying, we're on the verge of being able to come visit you. That's terrifying.
But the DC flyover occurred in July of 1952, and the first hydrogen bombs were tested later that year in November. So the timing is a bit off if Weinstein is attempting to draw an exact correlation. But what's not as well known is that at the time, a state-of-the-art plutonium and tritium production facility was being built at Savannah River Site in South Carolina. In July of 1952, it had just become operational, and it was the most secretive atomic site in the United States. In fact, a young nuclear engineer stationed there named John Anderson was required to attend a group event with 100 other engineers on site to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the founding of DuPont Company in 1802. Kinda weird, but hey, I guess that's what you celebrate while working on a nuclear site. Anderson and his colleagues were quickly overtaken by a green glowing object, angular in size, darting back and forth erratically at high speeds and altitudes, with phenomenal maneuverability. We now know that the date of this event was likely July 19, 1952, the peak day of sightings for the 1952 DC flyover. Were the UFOs perhaps trying to send a message to our federal government? And what was being detected by the best American telescopes at the time? Well, I've spoken to an amazing Swedish astronomer named Beatrice Villarreal about just that.
So we were comparing these images from the early 50s to images as it looks today, and I was hoping to see this perfect sparkling star that you can find in multiple images that one day vanishes. And I had this image where you could see multiple stars appearing and vanishing, which is completely crazy. I got an idea of that one of the ways how one can also search for more such examples is by looking for those that are lying along a line or in a narrow band. And we had two such examples that were statistically significant. One is 5 objects on a narrow band, and it's from the 27th of July 1952. And then my colleague Enrique found these 3 stars that triple transient. This one is from the 19th of July 1952.
That's absolutely amazing. I mean, because in UFO lore, this Washington invasion or DC flyover where there were saucers all over DC at the time, and it was July of 1952, but it was specifically 2 weekends. It was the 19th and 20th, and it was the 26th and 27th. So I find that absolutely remarkable.
But Eric Weinstein may have still been right in another sense. There is actually a direct link between the hydrogen bomb blasts at the Marshall Islands and UFOs. The famous tests codenamed Operation Ivy and Operation Castle.
There was another major one called Project Castle or Operation Castle in the spring of '54. And I found sailors who were aboard various vessels who were describing very brief but clearly sightings of disc-shaped objects or spherical-shaped objects hovering over their ships.
In fact, the entry from the deck log of the USS Curtis, the ship that detonated the hydrogen bomb at Bikini Atoll, reads, "At 23:05, an unidentified luminous object passed over ship from bow to stern, yellowish orange in color, traveling at a high rate of speed and a low altitude."
I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
The connection between UFOs and nuclear was known since the beginning of American government atomic programs. We now know, due to verified declassified documents, that on May 5, 1949, after multiple sightings at Killeen Base at Camp Hood, Texas, which stored America's largest nuclear stockpile to date, that an emergency meeting was held. The meeting included the Air Force's Office of Special Investigations, the Office of Naval Intelligence, Army Counterintelligence, and the FBI. They were called in to discuss the sudden, ubiquitous appearance of UFOs across nuclear bases in the US. Also that year, a now public FBI memo was sent to Director J. Edgar Hoover, reporting flying discs, flying saucers, and balls of fire, quote unquote, considered top secret by intelligence officers of both the Army and Air Force. The memo goes on to discuss frequent sightings at Los Alamos, the headquarters of the Manhattan Project.
There's some people I'm colleagues with that, like, their grandparents were actually, the UFO report people on the Manhattan Project. And I remember being told that. I'm like, really? Holy crap, that's crazy. There's like a whole other side of the Manhattan Project.
The connection between UFOs and nuclear was known since the beginning of American government atomic programs. And UFOs are classified with the same protocols governing American atomic secrets.
If something is not a nuke, but it has radiological energy coming off it, alpha, beta decay, whatever.
Same secrecy.
Same secrecy.
In a 1952 Look magazine article titled "The Hunt for the Flying Saucer," Chief UFO investigator for the Air Force, Captain Edward J. Ruppelt, is quoted saying, "Many of the sightings reported had originated at one atomic weapons-related site or another, all around the country."
And Ruppelt is on record in the article saying that we are aware of 63 separate incidents of UFOs being sighted at nuclear weapons facilities.
In fact, the rumors of UFOs at Los Alamos and other nuclear sites were so widespread that Eleanor Roosevelt wrote to Oppenheimer inquiring about them. Responding with a letter that's been fully verified and archived in the Library of Congress, Oppenheimer wrote back reassuring the former First Lady that these were just rumors. But from a 1971 Australian intelligence document written by the head of their nuclear division, Harry Turner, Oppenheimer was deeply involved in exotic anti-gravity research. So was Oppenheimer playing dumb?
Would Oppenheimer have been told? The Manhattan Project would have custody of it, and then it would go into the Atomic Energy Commission, and then it would go into the Department of Energy, which has its own line of clearances. And that's why I can't find, among the people I know who have clearances above top secret, they've never heard of this.
Yeah.
They've never heard of this because you can be in the Pentagon with a top secret clearance, but if you're not briefed on the atomic secrets, you wouldn't get the clearances that you needed to do to open up that thing.